Welcome to this T-level Getting Ready to Assess Accounting bite-sized session on getting to understand and know the core assessments. In this bite-sized session, we'll have a look at the different types of questions that might appear on the core papers and how they will be assessed. And then we'll also have a look at the different types of tasks that appear on the employer set project and the ways that they'll be assessed. With the points-based questions then. These questions will appear on both of the core papers and they are designed to test students' knowledge of the content that they've learnt while studying their core component. These questions will be smaller based questions. There might be 1 mark, 2 mark, and they'll be looking at asking students to recall knowledge. So for example, here you can see they're asking them to name a government organisation or give one way to measure business performance. Now, these questions are points based because for each correct statement that the student gives, they will get a mark. So as you can see here, if they've answered question 1 with HMRC or His Majesty's Revenue and Customs, that's a mark. And for question 2 there, if they've answered with content such as financial, customer retention, SWOT analysis, KPIs, that will also get them a mark. So as long as they're making one statement for this particular questions, they will get 1 mark. And equally, if it's a 2 mark points-based question, they'll be required to give 2 bits of information or maybe a bit of information with the development. And as long as that meets those criteria within the mark scheme there, they'll be awarded those marks. So in addition to those shorter points-based questions we've just had a look at, we also have some medium response points-based questions. So these might be 4 markers where it's 2 markers together to make a 4 marker, or it might be a 3 marker as you can see here. So with explain, you can have 2 markers. So you might have explain 1 benefit of something or explain 1 impact, and the student would get 2 marks for making their sort of the benefit, stating the benefit, and then the development point. Here, with this explain question, there are 3 marks available. So the student is going to be asked to give the reason, give a development point, and then a further development point. So it's important when you're preparing students for assessment that they make sure they have a look at how many points the explain questions are worth, because they could be worth 2, they could be worth 3 marks. Where you see a 4 mark explain question, it's going to be explain 2. So that's in effect, you can teach them that it's a 2, like a 2-2 making 4, but with a 3, it's going to be the explain 1 with 2 development points. And as you can see here, as long as they're giving their reason, and then they've got an appropriately linked justification, and then a further expansion, they'll get a mark for each of those. So it's a good way to teach them strategy when you're looking at these points-based questions, be it those really short knowledge in isolation, 1 mark, 2 marks at the start with the give, the name, the states, or whether you're looking more at these medium response questions where they're explaining and they're 3 marks, because then they've got a strategy, they know what they've got to do, they know how many developments they've got to give or how much they've got to write, and they can use that to plan their time accordingly. Another type of question that students will see on their papers are calculation questions. Now, they will find that there are questions that have got stimulus material with data on both papers, but on paper 1, they might be asked to calculate, as you can see in this question, whereas on paper 2, they're looking at the application of that data or what that data means for the business in the scenario. So they need to be prepared that when they see paper 1, that there will be calculation questions that they will need to undertake. So they'll be given some stimulus material, as you can see here with the scenario. And then in this instance, they're being asked to calculate the profit for the year. So they'd use the information from the extract or from the case study, the stimulus material there, and then they would undertake that activity. Now, these are points based, so they can get, for this one, these are 2 markers, so they would get 2 marks for giving the correct answer. But if they were to give the wrong answer, then the examiner will go down and look at the different components of the way that the calculation is done, and then they'll decide if there's been any sort of steps that they can award marks for. So it's really important. I know we tell students all the time, but it's essential that they're writing out their step-by-step stages, because if something goes wrong, so they transpose a number or they forget a number like a 0 off the end, the examiner can still give them marks there. So in this instance, you can see they can get a mark for working out the gross profit. They can get a mark for giving the profit for the year calculation, or they can get marks for doing the numbers down the bottom. So there's 3 different ways that they could get a mark. Now, obviously, if they've given 2 of those, but they've got the wrong answer, they're still only going to get 1 mark. But it's useful, and it also helps with the students. You can say to them, look, go back over, check your working, check that your working makes sense with your answer, because sometimes it might actually prompt the students to go back and look at it and go, hang on, that's not quite right. So calculation questions, paper 1, and obviously make sure they're getting in those workings out for us so that the examiners can give them credit where they've not quite got the correct answer. So on both papers, students will find what we call levels-based questions. So these are our medium and extended open response questions. So they feature 6 markers, 9 markers and 12 markers are what marked using level-based marking. So what would happen is students will get some stimulus material, like we saw for the calculation question, they had the scenario there. They'll be expected to read that scenario, that stimulus material, and then they'll be given a question. So you can see here, this is an evaluate which two of these types would be the most effective. And then they're marked based on the quality of the answer that they're written. So if you have a look here, you can see that there are 3 levels. So if students are providing a basic analysis, a basic application, or a basic evaluation, they're likely to be placed into level 1. If they're giving more of a good analysis, good application, good evaluation, that would be band 2. And you can see there that band 3 is using thorough and comprehensive. And this applies across the 6, the 9 and the 12 markers. So it's good language to be using with the students. You can, when you're giving them feedback, say, this is a basic analysis or this is a good analysis. So it helps them to understand if they're looking at the mark schemes themselves, maybe they're doing independent revision or they're working together, that they can see where they're sort of hitting in terms of their quality of their answers. You'll also see in the mark scheme that they will give you what we call indicative content. So that's answers that students could use. They are not exhaustive. That's why you'll often see within mark schemes the accept any other answer. That's so that examiners know that if a student has come up with an answer that is not within the mark scheme but is correct, they can award it. The only time you won't see accept any other answer is when there's only one definitive answer or there's a couple. So, for example, if your question was something along the lines of name the 4 P's of marketing, there's only 4 answers they can give. So that wouldn't necessarily have the accept any other acceptable answer. When you're looking at these really long questions here, these extended open response where students could bring in a whole wealth of knowledge, the mark scheme can't cover everything. So it covers what the main sort of student responses are expected to be, and then examiners are able to then use their professional judgment to then award marks based on what they're seeing. So if students are going off piste and they've got answers that are not in the indicative content and you're marking sort of formative assessments, as long as it's correct, you can award it. And obviously just make sure you're using those level-based marks as you go through. So checking, is it a basic analysis? So we're thinking, have they got a consideration of both sides? Is it a balanced judgment argument that they're making? Have they got context? So they need to have reference back to, in this particular example, Bahu accountants. So they need to go back to that stimulus material, back to that scenario, pick out information that they're then using. So not just having generic information about data analytics and AI software, they're actually giving sort of examples that are relevant to that business within their answers. And then obviously that evaluation, because it's a 12-mark question, it is expected that students are providing a conclusion on their answers. For the 6 and 9 markers, they don't necessarily need to. Certainly for the 6, but check the sort of command verb. But for the 12s, they absolutely must, because it is assessing AO3B, which is those evaluative marks. So students really do need to get used to making sure that they are giving a balanced argument, that they are including context from the scenario, and that they are then making a conclusion. So for here, they have got to say which one, having considered both options, the pros and cons of both options, they must say overall they feel that, make a statement, and then they've got to back that up with evidence. Potentially new information at this point as well would be good, so that they can show that they've really understood what they're doing. Now, it's important that you practice these. You can come up with sort of strategies. Lots of people will use lots of different acronyms when writing sort of these longer assessments. They might have some that they've learned at sort of GCSE. Nothing wrong with those, but it's just making sure that what they're doing and what you're teaching them will make sure that they're able to access all of the marks that are based on these level-based questions. Having had a quick look at the core papers now, we're going to move on to have a look at the other part of the core component assessments, which is the Employer Set Project, or the ESP. Employer Set Project, students will be given a pre-release. Now, this pre-release gives them some information about the sector or the type of business that they're going to be asked to consider within their Employer Set Project. Now, the pre-release is not going to necessarily be used in all the tasks. Students are going to need wider knowledge. They're going to be assessed on stuff that you look at the pre-release and think, well, that's not in the tasks. The idea behind the pre-release is to make sure that students have got that wider knowledge. So when they're coming into their tasks and they're seeing tasks that are asking them to make recommendations or make suggestions, they've got that wider knowledge that they can apply. So for example, in this pre-release, you can see that it's asking them to research the purpose of business activity, the factors of production, and the characteristics of and differences between private sector and public sector organisations. So the students might go off and look at maybe different ways they do their accounting. It might be different sorts of policies or processes that they have. It might be they go and have a look at the different types of products and services that they offer, where they get their income from, what their expenditure is generally on, all those sorts of things, so that when they come to do their tasks, and we'll look at the tasks in a minute, they've already got that background knowledge that they can then apply. So this is an example of one of the tasks that are on the Employer Set Project for accounting. So students are given a scenario. Here it's about JOT accounting. It gives them some information. They're also given some sources, opportunities, and some weaknesses. So they've been given a range of information, and then they are given the time to complete those tasks. So as you can see here, not all of the information that is in that scenario is in on the screen, because there is a lot of information in that task one booklet. So you can see here that there will have been financial data as well that they've been given, because the first thing they've been asked to do is to go and do some calculations. So within the Employer Set Project, we're not only assessing their knowledge, they're also going to be assessed on their digital skills when they do their presentations. They're going to be assessed on their English skills through some of their written tasks. They're also going to be assessed on maths skills. So it's important that students come prepared, that they remember to bring their calculators with them, and that they know what they're going to be looking at and what sort of accounting formulas they need to know. So you can see here they start out with looking at revenue and total expenses, and they're being asked to assess the percentage change. They've been given that information, they've got to work out the differences, and then they've been asked to assess the salaries as a percentage of total expenses. So it's important that they've also sort of recapping those skills that they will have learnt at GCSE, so that they can use them here. And then using that, they've then been asked to go on. So they've got the weaknesses and opportunities there, and they've been asked to then write a report that shows 4 strengths and 4 threats. And then they've been asked to go on to complete a reports as well, asking them to then identify which one is the most important. So you can see in task 1, there is a wide range of skills and knowledge that they're going to have to be able to demonstrate, and that some of this might be useful where they were doing their pre-release. They were looking at different public sector and private sector businesses. They can then bring that information in here to help them when they're maybe recommending their strengths or threats, or when they're looking at any impacts that the weaknesses and opportunities might have, or just when they're selecting which one they think has got the most impact and justifying why. So whilst it's not blatantly obvious to the student, if they read this, it doesn't say usual pre-release materials here, they are able to use the knowledge that they've got from their pre-release to sort of deepen the quality of the work and the knowledge that they're showing in this task. See here, some of these are the resources that were provided to supplement task 1 that we've just looked at. Each different task will come with different stimulus material. It might come with resource booklets that have got different information in as well. So it's important that students understand what documents they should be expecting, what they need to do with it, and how they can use it. So you can see here for task 1, they were given sort of an organisational chart. They were given the data there to help them with their calculations. They were also given some sort of secondary data there that they can use as well to extract information about what the strengths and threats and opportunities and weaknesses were, and then apply that in their work. And then obviously they can supplement that with any other knowledge that they've got, maybe from being taught in class, independent study, or from their pre-release. So it's as important to teach the students the skills to identify and extract the information from all of the information they're being given, because it's quite a lot of information to sit down, to read, to process, to extract, and then apply. So it's going to be a skill that they're going to need to practice consistently throughout the academic year. It might be you start them with it, teach them how to extract knowledge, teach them how to apply it, so that by the time they are prepared for their employer set project, they've become confident in what they've got to do and how they've got to use it. And obviously, if they're confident for their employer set projects, that's really going to help them when they go on to their occupational specialism next year, where they've got the same approach, where they'll be given data, they'll be expected to read it, to analyse it, to extract the relevant information, and then to apply it to the scenario they've been given. And finally, you can see an example of a mark scheme. So this again is from task 1. So within the employer set project, there is going to be a mixture of the points-based marking and the levels-based marking. Now, points-based marking is primarily going to be, we've got calculations, or you've got activities like the SWOT where they're being asked to state them and you can easily points-base them. Whereas if it's a longer response question, so for example, where they're justifying which one of their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are most significant, that will be using the levels based. So it's important that students understand that if it's something like calculations, or it's something where they're being asked to give 1, 2, 3 of something, it's likely to be points based, and they're going to need to hit certain amounts of information or certain types of information. Whereas for the longer response questions where they're being asked to analyse, assess, justify, evaluate, it's going to be using these level based, and exactly the same as with the exam questions, they're the same here. So you're looking at basic down here in that band 1, so it's not significant or it's limited down there. As you're moving into band 2, it becomes more significant. They're giving good answers. And then when they get up to the top there, it's comprehensive. So you can stick to those words of limited, basic, and comprehensive, or thorough for the top band as well, so that you've got, when you're doing assessment with students, it's consistent across all of the external assessments. So when you look at the occupational specialism, well, you'll notice that where they're using levels based, it's the same terminology. So students can quite quickly get used to, is it basic? Is it good? Is it comprehensive and thorough? You can use that sort of terminology in your teaching, and it helps them to then identify where they're sitting and what they're going to need to then consider in terms of next steps to help them achieve those grades that they want to achieve. So thank you for listening to this bite-sized session on the core component external assessments. I hope it's been useful looking at the different types of questions you might get on the core papers. on the tasks on the employer set project, and then obviously how these tasks and questions will be assessed so that you can support your students in achieving the best grades they can.